Your doctor can tell you your blood sugar is normal and you can still be gaining fat. You can be exhausted after every meal, and you can be 3 to 5 years away from full type 2 diabetes. That's not a scare tactic. That's what the research actually shows. Because the test your doctor runs completely misses the early stage of insulin resistance. The standard fasting glucose is the wrong marker. Your body is working 10 times harder than it should just to keep that number looking normal. And by the time that number goes up, the damage has been building for years. But here's what almost nobody tells you. You can check your actual insulin sensitivity right now. Today, at home. No blood draw, no lab order. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly how to do that. Let's start with something that should genuinely bother you. About 88 million Americans are in a state called prediabetes. That's 1 in 3 adults. Insulin resistance that's already progressed, and according to the CDC, 84% of them have no idea. They feel okay. Labs look fine. Doctor says they're healthy. That number is wild, 84%. And the reason they don't know is because of how insulin resistance actually develops. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, decade-long process. And for most of that process, your body compensates so aggressively. Your blood glucose stays in the normal range even as the system is deteriorating underneath. Think of it this way. Imagine your body's insulin system as a nightclub bouncer. When everything's working right, one bouncer handles the door effortlessly. Glucose comes in. Insulin signals the cells to open up. Done. But insulin resistance is what happens when the crowd starts ignoring the bouncer. So your pancreas hires 2 bouncers, then 4, then 8, still keeping order. Glucose still normal, but now the whole operation is working way harder than it should. Your doctor checks the crowd size. Normal. Says you're fine. Nobody checked how many bouncers you're burning through. That's what's happening in your body right now if you're insulin resistant. Your pancreas is producing massive amounts of insulin just to keep your blood sugar in range. It's working, for now, until it can't. That tipping point is when glucose goes high. That's when the diagnosis comes. But the actual problem started years before. So here's the real question. How do you know where you are in that process right now? Before the labs change, that's what these at-home checks are for. And I want to be clear about something before we get into the checks. These aren't guesses. The ones I'm going to walk you through are based on clinical research, the same markers doctors use in research settings to identify insulin resistance early. You can do them without a single blood test. And the results are going to tell you more than most routine lab panels. Before the tests, before the IA makes sense, you need to understand the mechanism. Because once you understand what's actually breaking down inside your body, the symptoms stop feeling random. Insulin is a storage hormone. Its entire job is to manage what happens to glucose after you eat. When you eat carbohydrates, those carbs break down into glucose. Glucose enters your bloodstream. Blood glucose rises. Your pancreas detects that rise and releases insulin. Insulin then acts like a key. It travels to your cells, your muscle cells, fat cells, liver cells, and it unlocks the door that lets glucose enter. Glucose goes in, gets used for energy or stored. Blood sugar drops back down. That's the whole system working perfectly. Insulin resistance is what happens when the lock stops responding to the key. More specifically, here's the mechanism. It starts at the level of your cell membranes. When you chronically eat excess calories, your cells get overloaded with glucose, particularly processed carbohydrates and refined sugars. As a self-protection mechanism, they start downregulating the GLUT4 transporters. These are the proteins that physically move glucose across the cell membrane. Fewer transporters. Less glucose getting in. Blood sugar starts to creep up even with insulin present. Pancreas responds by making more insulin. More insulin helps for a while. Cells adapt again, downregulating even further. Pancreas makes even more insulin. This is the spiral. And while that spiral is spinning, here's what you're actually experiencing in your body. Your fat cells start receiving constant insulin signals. Fat cells are particularly insulin sensitive. Insulin doesn't just move glucose. It tells your body to stop burning fat. Constant high insulin means constant fat storage mode, not because you're eating too many calories, because your insulin is structurally elevated. Your liver, meanwhile, starts doing something called de novo lipogenesis. It converts that excess glucose directly into triglycerides, fat in the blood, which is why one of the earliest blood markers of insulin resistance isn't actually glucose. It's elevated triglycerides. Your brain starts experiencing energy swings. Cells that rely on glucose for fuel are getting inconsistent delivery. Afternoon crashes, difficulty concentrating, carb cravings that feel almost neurological, because they kind of are, and your blood pressure starts to climb. Insulin causes sodium retention in the kidneys. More sodium, more fluid, more pressure on arterial walls. One system, dozens of downstream effects. Now you understand why this matters. Let's check whether it's happening to you. Here's the thing about what you're about to do. Most people who take these tests are shocked by what they find, not because they're unhealthy people, because insulin resistance has almost nothing to do with how you look. It has everything to do with patterns. Patterns you're going to recognize the second I name them. First check, no equipment needed except a soft measuring tape. This is the waist-to-height ratio, and I want to explain why this matters before you measure. Because the number is going to land differently once you understand the biology. Your fat cells are not all the same. The fat stored subcutaneously is metabolically relatively quiet, just under the skin, around your hips and thighs. It's the fat you can grab, not great aesthetically, but not particularly dangerous metabolically. The fat that matters is visceral fat. The fat stored inside your abdominal cavity, wrapped around your organs, your liver, your pancreas, your intestines. This fat is completely different at the molecular level. It's metabolically active. It releases inflammatory cytokines. It secretes free fatty acids directly into the portal vein, the vein that feeds your liver. And it directly promotes insulin resistance. And here's what is critical. You cannot see visceral fat. Someone can be relatively lean by appearance and have dangerous levels of visceral fat. Someone can be overweight by BMI and have relatively low visceral fat. BMI tells you almost nothing about this. What does tell you something? Your waist circumference relative to your height. Research from the International Journal of Obesity analyzed over 300,000 subjects. The waist-to-height ratio outperformed BMI in predicting cardiometabolic risk. This was true in nearly every demographic group. A 2020 meta-analysis confirmed that a ratio above 0.5 correlates strongly with visceral adiposity. And it correlates with insulin resistance markers, regardless of overall body weight. So, how to measure? Stand up. Find the midpoint between the bottom of your rib cage and the top of your hip bones. This is usually right around your belly button. Use that as your landmark. Take a normal breath. Breathe out naturally. Don't suck in. Wrap the measuring tape around that point. Write down that number. Now measure your height. In the same units, divide your waist by your height. If you're under 0.5, you're in the lower risk category. Good baseline. If you're between 0.5 and 0.6, increased risk. Visceral fat accumulation is likely present. Worth paying close attention to the other markers in this video. If you're above 0.6, high-risk zone. The research is pretty clear. At this threshold, insulin resistance is probable, not just possible. One more thing about this measurement. The direction of travel matters as much as the number. If you've been taking this measurement over months and it's been creeping up even slightly, even if you're still under 0.5, That trend is worth taking seriously. Your body is always telling you something. Most of the time, we're just not listening. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because the next check is going to give you information that your actual blood glucose test doesn't, and it involves something you've almost certainly experienced. Maybe every single day, without realizing what it means. You're going to do a simple self-audit, but I want to set it up properly first. Your body processes a meal in roughly 4 phases, roughly the first 30 minutes. Absorption. Glucose is entering the bloodstream. Insulin is rising. Energy is moving toward cells, around 45 minutes to 90 minutes. Peak insulin response. This is when insulin is working hardest to clear glucose from the blood. If your cells are sensitive, this process is efficient. Clean. Energy stabilizes. 2 to 3 hours post-meal. Return to baseline. If the system worked correctly, blood glucose is back in range. Insulin is low. Energy feels steady. Now here's what happens when you're insulin resistant. Your cells don't respond efficiently to insulin. Your pancreas overcompensates, releases more insulin than needed. Glucose clears faster than it should. Blood sugar actually drops too low, a phenomenon called reactive hypoglycemia. Your brain starts signaling an emergency. The brain runs almost entirely on glucose. Cortisol releases, adrenaline spikes. You feel exhausted, irritable, unable to concentrate, and you experience an intense craving for carbs. This is the crash. And here's the critical thing. This is not a willpower problem. This is not you being lazy. This is a hormonal event driven by a structural problem in your insulin system. The self-audit. For 3 days, answer these questions. Honestly. 1. Within 2 hours of eating a carbohydrate-heavy meal, do you experience a significant energy drop? Pasta, bread, rice, fruit juice, cereal, anything like that. Not just a little tired. An actual, notable drop in energy and focus? 2. Do you experience strong cravings for sugar or starchy foods in the afternoon? Typically between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. Cravings that feel compulsive, not just I could eat a snack. 3. Does eating a large carbohydrate meal make you feel better immediately, but worse 30 to 60 minutes later? 4. Do you need significant time to feel alert in the morning, even after a full night's sleep? And does that alertness improve markedly after eating? 5. Do you find that eating fat and protein alone doesn't trigger the same crash, or that you feel more consistently energized on lower carb days? Score yourself 5 yes answers. You're looking at strong symptoms of insulin resistance, 3 to 4, significant possibility, 1 to 2, possible mild insulin sensitivity issues or dietary pattern issues. 0. Either your insulin sensitivity is solid or your carbohydrate intake is already so low that you're not triggering the cycle. Now, there's a way to make this more objective, and this is where it gets really interesting. You can purchase a continuous glucose monitor over the counter. In the UK and many European countries, the Freestyle Libre 2 sensor is available at pharmacies without a prescription. In the US, the Dexcom Stelo and Abbott Lingo are now FDA cleared for non-diabetic use and available without a prescription. You wear a small sensor on the back of your upper arm. For 2 weeks, it reads your interstitial glucose every minute. Here's what you're looking for, specifically. After a standard carbohydrate meal, your glucose should rise. Peak somewhere between 120 to 140 milligrams per deciliter, and return to baseline within 90 minutes to 2 hours. Clean curve. That's good insulin sensitivity. What insulin resistance looks like on a CGM is different. You'll see spikes, often over 160, sometimes over 180, followed by a rapid drop, sometimes below your fasting level. That drop is the reactive hypoglycemia. That's the crash you've been feeling. 2 weeks of CGM data will tell you more about your metabolic health than most routine blood work, not because the lab values are wrong, but because they only capture a single snapshot. The CGM shows you the pattern. Now we're going to do the third check, and this one, if you take it seriously, is genuinely the most informative. This is the Informal Carbohydrate Challenge. Here's what you need. A blood glucose monitor. They're available at any pharmacy for about $15 to $20. The test strips are a few dollars more. Total cost, maybe $25. Or if you already have CGM data, even better. You can watch everything happen in real time. Here's the protocol. Night before, eat a normal dinner, whatever you usually eat. Nothing unusual. Stop eating by 9 p.m. Morning of, don't eat breakfast, don't drink anything except water. At a time you choose, let's call it 8 a.m. Take your fasting glucose reading. Write it down. A normal fasting glucose is 70 to 99 milligrams per deciliter. 100 to 125 is classified as impaired fasting glucose. A prediabetes marker. Above 125 is diabetic range. But here's what almost nobody explains. A normal fasting glucose doesn't tell you how your body responds to food, and that response is where insulin resistance shows itself first, the post-meal glucose curve. So after you take your fasting reading, eat this meal. This is the challenge meal. 2 slices of white bread and a medium banana, or if you want to standardize it more precisely, 75 grams of pure glucose dissolved in water. That is the clinical oral glucose tolerance test standard. But the bread and banana works and is far more practical. High glycemic, fast-absorbing carbs. About 60 to 75 grams of total carbohydrate. This will spike your glucose significantly. Do not add fat or protein to this meal. Fat and protein slow glucose absorption. We want to see how your body handles the carbohydrate challenge on its own. Now, wait. At 30 minutes, take your glucose, write it down. At 60 minutes, take it. Again, write it down. At 90 minutes. One more reading. At 120 minutes. Final reading. Now here's how to interpret what you're seeing. A person with excellent insulin sensitivity will show a modest rise, the insulin system working as it was designed, peaking somewhere around 120 to 130 milligrams per deciliter at 30 to 60 minutes. Returning to near baseline by 90 to 120 minutes, within 10 to 15 points of their fasting level, clean, efficient, early insulin resistance pattern, higher peak, 140 to 170 milligrams per deciliter, slower return, still back to baseline by 120 minutes, but just barely. And you'll notice how you feel. Probably tired, potentially brain fog, maybe a little anxious. That's the overcorrection. Your pancreas releasing excess insulin, significant insulin resistance, peak over 170 milligrams per deciliter. Slow decline, possibly still above 130 milligrams per deciliter at the 2-hour mark. Clinical criteria for prediabetes on an OGTT is a 2-hour reading of 140 to 199 milligrams per deciliter. Above 200 at 2 hours is diagnostic for diabetes. And here's something even more informative. Watch for the drop. If your glucose peaks and then crashes, drops more than 20 to 25 points below your fasting baseline, that reactive hypoglycemia I described earlier, that's right there on paper. That's your insulin system overshooting. I want to say something important here. If your numbers fall in the concerning range, don't panic. Get this information to your doctor. This informal test is not a diagnosis, but it is a signal, and it's a signal worth taking seriously. What I want you to understand is this. You now have real data. Most people go years without ever actually testing how their body responds to food. You just did that. Now here's what I want you to hold on to. All 3 of these checks are not just tests. The waist measurement, the symptom pattern, the carb challenge. They're feedback loops. And a feedback loop is only useful if you know what to do with the information. So, let's talk about the 14-day reset, because if any of these checks flagged something for you, or even if they didn't but you want to move in the right direction, what you're about to hear is the most research-backed protocol for improving insulin sensitivity that exists. No medication, no extreme approach, just the specific interventions that have the strongest evidence behind them. Why 14 days? Because insulin sensitivity is not a fixed trait. It's a dynamic, adaptable function of your physiology. Research shows measurable improvements can occur within 72 hours of behavioral change. 2 weeks is enough time to see meaningful shifts. Shifts in fasting glucose, post-meal glucose curves, and how you feel. We're going to cover 4 interventions. Each one has independent, robust evidence. Together, they compound. Intervention 1. Post-meal walking. This is probably the single most underrated metabolic intervention that exists. Here's the mechanism. Your skeletal muscles are the largest glucose sink in your body. When your muscles contract, they can pull glucose directly from your bloodstream. They use a different pathway than insulin. This is called GLUT4 translocation via AMPK activation, and it's essentially an insulin-independent backdoor into your cells. Translation: your muscles can absorb glucose without needing insulin at all, as long as they're active. A 2022 study took 70 studies on post-meal exercise and meta-analyzed them. The finding was striking. A 10-minute walk taken within 60 to 90 minutes after a meal reduced post-meal glucose spikes by approximately 20 to 30%, compared to staying sedentary. Not a 30-minute run, a 10-minute walk. The timing matters enormously. Walking before a meal has essentially no effect on post-meal glucose. Walking more than 2 hours after changes little. The window is 30 to 90 minutes post-meal. That's when glucose is peaking in your bloodstream, and that's when the muscles can intercept it most effectively. What this looks like practically. After breakfast, 10 minutes. After lunch, 10 minutes. After dinner, 10 minutes. 30 minutes of total walking per day, split across meals. Not consecutive, not strenuous, just moving. If you do nothing else in this protocol, do this. The evidence is overwhelming and the investment is almost nothing. People who wear CGMs and try this for the first time are genuinely shocked. They watch their post-meal glucose spike get cut nearly in half. In real time, not from changing what they ate, just from going for a short walk. Intervention 2. Carbohydrate timing and sequencing. This doesn't mean going low carb. It means being strategic about when and how you eat carbohydrates, because the same 50 grams of carbohydrate can have dramatically different effects depending on context. 3 specific evidence-based strategies. Here. Strategy 1. Eat carbohydrates. Last, a study showed that eating vegetables and protein first reduced post-meal glucose peaks by up to 37%. Compared to eating carbohydrates first. Same foods, same amounts, different order. The mechanism is partly about gastric emptying rate. Protein and fiber slow how quickly the stomach empties, which slows glucose absorption, and partly about gut hormones. GLP-1 secretion is enhanced when fibrous foods hit the small intestine first, which augments insulin response. So practically, eat your salad, your vegetables, your protein first, bread, rice, pasta, potatoes. Eat these last. Strategy 2. Don't eat carbohydrates alone. An isolated carbohydrate spikes glucose faster and higher than the same carbohydrate eaten with protein or fat. A piece of bread, a banana, a glass of juice. The combination slows absorption and blunts the insulin spike. This doesn't mean you need to add a ton of fat to every carb. It means don't snack on crackers alone. Add some cheese or nut butter. Don't drink orange juice on an empty stomach. Don't eat dry cereal without protein alongside it. Strategy 3. Time most of your carbohydrates around physical activity. Your muscles are most insulin sensitive in the hours immediately following exercise. This is the ideal window to consume higher glycemic carbohydrates. They're more likely to go to muscle glycogen replenishment than fat storage. If you're going to eat a higher carb meal, make it your post-workout meal. Conversely, late-night carbohydrate intake has some of the worst metabolic impact within 2 to 3 hours of sleep. Insulin sensitivity follows a circadian pattern. Your cells are less responsive to insulin in the evening. The same meal eaten at 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. produces meaningfully different glucose responses. This is not permission to obsess over every meal. It's permission to make 2 or 3 targeted adjustments and see what shifts. Intervention 3. Sleep quality and duration. This one surprises people, but the evidence is exceptionally strong, and the mechanism is direct. Sleep deprivation causes insulin resistance, not slowly, rapidly. A landmark study had healthy adults sleep for 4 hours per night for just 6 days. After 6 days, their insulin sensitivity had dropped to a level comparable to type 2 diabetics. 6 days. Full restoration of insulin sensitivity required more than a week of normal sleep. After the deprivation period, 1 night of bad sleep doesn't fully recover you. Here's the mechanism. During deep sleep, your body clears metabolic waste. Slow-wave sleep. It manages cortisol and performs essentially all of its cellular repair processes. Sleep deprivation elevates cortisol chronically. Cortisol is a counter-regulatory hormone to insulin. It directly opposes insulin's ability to signal cells. Additionally, sleep deprivation disrupts the balance of 2 hunger hormones. Ghrelin rises and leptin drops. Ghrelin drives hunger. Leptin signals fullness. This creates neurobiological hunger, the kind that's very hard to resist through willpower alone, specifically driving cravings for high-sugar, high-calorie foods. So the person who's sleep-deprived is getting hit from both sides. More insulin-resistant on a cellular level, and more likely to eat the exact foods that worsen insulin resistance. For the 14-day reset, prioritize sleep as aggressively as anything else. Specifically, consistent sleep and wake times, even on weekends. Your circadian rhythm governs cortisol timing, and inconsistency disrupts IT temperature. Core body temperature drops during sleep initiation. A cool bedroom facilitates this. Around 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 to 20 degrees Celsius. Research showed that adults who slept in 66 degrees Fahrenheit rooms doubled their volume of metabolically active brown fat compared to those sleeping in warmer rooms. Brown fat is directly involved in glucose metabolism. Light exposure. Morning light. Natural. Sunlight within 30 to 60 minutes of waking. It anchors your cortisol peak to the morning and helps it taper appropriately through the day. This is a direct intervention on your cortisol-insulin axis. No food within 2 to 3 hours of bed. Digestion competes with sleep quality. Elevated insulin at sleep onset disrupts growth hormone secretion, which occurs primarily in early slow-wave sleep. Intervention 4. Strength training. This is the one most people underestimate. Because they think about exercise for burning calories. That's not what this is about. Your skeletal muscle tissue is the primary site of glucose disposal in your body. Under normal conditions, approximately 80 to 85% of glucose uptake after a meal occurs in skeletal muscle. More muscle mass equals more capacity to absorb and utilize glucose. More glucose capacity means less glucose staying in your bloodstream. Less insulin required. Lower baseline insulin levels. This is why strength training is particularly powerful for insulin sensitivity, not just cardio. Cardio improves insulin sensitivity acutely. For hours after a session, strength training improves it both acutely and chronically, by literally building the infrastructure that handles glucose. A 2019 meta-analysis examined 18 randomized controlled trials on resistance training and insulin sensitivity. Significant improvements were found even when body weight didn't change. The adaptation is happening at the level of the muscle cell. More GLUT4 transporters, more mitochondrial density, improved glycogen storage capacity. For the 14-day reset, you don't need to become a powerlifter. You need to stress your major muscle groups 2 to 3 times per week. The most efficient protocol for this purpose: compound movements, squats or goblet squats, deadlifts or Romanian deadlifts, push-ups or bench press, rows. These movements recruit the largest muscle groups: glutes, hamstrings, quadriceps, back. Bigger muscles equals more glucose capacity. 3 sets. Each. 8 to 12 reps, enough load that the last 2 reps are genuinely difficult. And here's something critical for people over 50 specifically. The research shows that older adults experience equal or greater improvements in insulin sensitivity. Compared to younger adults, you are not past the point where this works. If anything, the muscle you build has more metabolic urgency at this stage of life. Now let me put these 4 pieces together in a way that makes practical sense. Because individually, these interventions are good, but what the research shows is that the combination is where the real change happens. The stack. Here's what a day looks like. Morning, wake at the same time as yesterday. Get outside within 30 to 60 minutes of waking, even just 10 minutes of natural light. This one thing anchors your cortisol curve for the entire day. Breakfast, eat protein first, eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese. If you eat any carbohydrate, eat it after the protein. Don't eat carbs alone. Mid-morning to early afternoon, this is your optimal window for strength training if you're going to do IT. Insulin sensitivity is high in the morning, and glucose disposal is efficient. 3 times per week, 30 to 45 minutes. Lunch, same sequencing, protein and fiber first. Dinner, lighter on carbohydrates than lunch. Remember the circadian insulin sensitivity pattern. Finish eating 2 to 3 hours before you plan to sleep. After dinner, another 10-minute walk. Before bed. Cool room. No screens for the last 45 minutes, ideally. The blue light delay in melatonin onset is real and delays your sleep cycle. Same sleep time as the night before. That's it. That's the 14-day protocol. No extreme restriction, no complicated meal prep, no gym membership required. What you will notice if you're consistent: within 72 hours, the post-meal crashes start to soften. Within a week, morning energy begins to improve. By day 14, your waist measurement will likely have shifted slightly, and if you rerun the carb challenge, your curve will look cleaner. I want to say something specifically about aging and insulin resistance, because this is where the stakes go up. There are 3 things that happen biologically in your 50s and 60s that conspire to accelerate insulin resistance, completely independent of diet. First, muscle loss. Starting around age 30. You lose roughly 3 to 5% of your muscle mass per decade if you don't actively work against it. By your 50s, that's potentially 15 to 20% less glucose disposal capacity than you had at 30. Same diet. Worse glucose handling. This is called sarcopenic insulin resistance, and it's common and largely silent. Second, hormonal shifts. In women, estrogen plays a direct protective role in insulin sensitivity. It enhances GLUT4 expression and glucose uptake in muscle and fat cells. The drop in estrogen directly reduces insulin sensitivity. Independent of body composition changes. This is why women frequently notice they gain weight around the midsection during the menopausal transition, even without changing their diet. In men, declining testosterone is similarly linked to increased visceral fat accumulation and reduced insulin sensitivity, Lower testosterone leads to decreased muscle protein synthesis, higher body fat percentage, higher insulin resistance. Third, sleep architecture changes. The percentage of deep, slow-wave sleep you get naturally decreases with age, since deep sleep is when the most critical metabolic restoration occurs. Growth hormone secretion, cortisol clearing, cellular repair. Older adults are at a structural disadvantage in this domain. None of this is fatalistic, all of it is addressable. But it means that for people over 50, these 4 interventions aren't optional wellness upgrades. They're legitimate medical interventions for a biological shift that is otherwise happening by default. Now, there's one more thing I want to address before we close this out, because some of you are going to do these checks, see concerning numbers, and wonder, do I need medication? When do I need to go to a doctor? What's the line between handle this with lifestyle and this needs medical attention? I want to be clear about this. If your carb challenge 2-hour reading is above 140 milligrams per deciliter, or your fasting glucose is above 100 milligrams per deciliter, go see your doctor, specifically. Ask for these tests, because most routine physicals don't include all of them. Fasting insulin. This is different from fasting glucose. This is the key test for insulin resistance in its early stage. Normal fasting insulin is around 2 to 6 micro-international units per milliliter. Anything above 10 micro-international units per milliliter suggests insulin resistance is present even if glucose is still normal. Many labs consider 25 micro-international units per milliliter the upper end of normal. But research consistently shows that fasting insulin above 10 to 12 significantly predicts future type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cognitive decline. This is the test your doctor probably hasn't ordered. Ask for it by name. HOMA-IR. This is a calculation using your fasting glucose and fasting insulin together. It's the most widely used research marker for insulin resistance. The formula: fasting insulin multiplied by fasting glucose, divided by 405. A score above 2.0 suggests insulin resistance. Above 2.9 is strong evidence. Above 5.0 indicates severe resistance. Triglycerides. Remember the liver converting excess glucose to fat? Elevated fasting triglycerides are one of the earliest blood markers of insulin resistance, particularly above 150 milligrams per deciliter, and the ratio of triglycerides to HDL cholesterol is even more informative. ATG to HDL ratio above 3.0 is a strong predictor of insulin resistance and cardiovascular risk. HbA1c. This measures your average blood glucose over the past 3 months by looking at how much glucose has attached to your red blood cells. Normal is below 5.7%. Prediabetes is 5.7 to 6.4%. Diabetes is 6.5% and above. It's not the most sensitive early marker, but it's a useful baseline. When you bring these numbers back from your doctor, you'll have a complete picture, not just a blood sugar number, the full metabolic portrait. And here's what I want you to understand. If your numbers come back concerning, that's not a verdict. That's a starting point. Insulin resistance is one of the most reversible chronic conditions that exists. People reduce their HOMA-IR by 30 to 50% in 3 months with consistent lifestyle change. The biology is on your side if you give it the inputs it needs. I want to zoom out for a moment because understanding why this is so widespread changes how you think about your own habits. The average American consumed about 4 pounds of sugar per year in 1700. Today, that number is around 57 pounds per year. The introduction of high-fructose corn syrup in the 1970s. The explosion of ultra-processed food designed specifically to bypass satiety signals. The sedentary shift in most modern work. These are not individual failures. They're systematic pressures. Fructose specifically deserves attention. Unlike glucose, which can be metabolized by every cell in your body, Fructose is metabolized almost exclusively in the liver. When you consume large amounts of fructose, your liver is forced to process the entire load, particularly from liquid sources like soft drinks and fruit juices. It converts much of it directly to fat. It promotes a condition called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is now present in roughly 25% of American adults. And fatty liver directly drives insulin resistance. Ultra-processed foods are engineered to specific formulations of sugar, fat, and salt. Formulations that maximize palatability and minimize satiety. Signals. They don't just taste good, they're designed to trigger dopaminergic reward pathways in ways that undermine the brain's normal regulatory signals. And then there's chronic stress. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, directly opposes insulin. It signals the liver to release glucose into the bloodstream. It drives fat storage in the visceral region. Chronic psychological stress, without recovery, keeps cortisol baselines elevated in ways that continuously erode insulin sensitivity. This is not a judgment. This is the environment most people are living in right now. And the interventions we talked about are not just health habits. The walking, the sleep, the strength training, the food sequencing. They're physiological counterpressures against a set of environmental conditions that are working against your metabolic health by default. Here's what's actually worth understanding about insulin sensitivity. It's not just about avoiding diabetes. Insulin resistance is now understood as a central driver, not a side effect, a central driver. A cluster of conditions that together account for the majority of chronic disease burden in the modern world. Cardiovascular disease. Insulin resistance increases arterial inflammation. It promotes LDL particle size shifts toward the small dense particles that penetrate arterial walls. And it drives the hypertension I mentioned earlier through sodium retention. The connection between insulin resistance and heart disease is now considered one of the strongest causal links in modern medicine. Alzheimer's disease. This is the one that genuinely should get your attention. Researchers proposed as far back as 2005 that Alzheimer's disease should be classified as type 3 diabetes. The brain is highly insulin dependent. Insulin receptors are densely expressed throughout the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. When insulin resistance reaches the brain, neurons struggle to access glucose for energy. Cognitive function degrades. Memory systems are particularly vulnerable. A 2017 analysis identified modifiable risk factors accounting for approximately 35% of dementia cases worldwide. Insulin resistance, diabetes, and their upstream drivers featured prominently. Cancer. Chronic hyperinsulinemia is a growth signal. Excess insulin. Insulin activates the IGF-1 receptor pathway, which stimulates cell proliferation. Multiple cancer types show significantly elevated incidence in populations with insulin resistance. Breast, colorectal, prostate, and pancreatic cancers. I'm telling you this not to frighten you. I'm telling you because the interventions we're talking about address all of these risks simultaneously. Walking after meals, better sleep, building muscle, eating more strategically. The same physiology that improves your insulin sensitivity also reduces cardiovascular inflammation. It supports brain glucose metabolism and normalizes the hormonal environment that drives cancer risk. This is why this matters so much, not just the numbers. The downstream life that the numbers represent. So let's land this, because here's what I want you to walk away from this video actually doing in the next 24 hours. Step 1. Take your waist measurement today, right now. You need a tape measure and 2 minutes. Write down the number. Divide it by your height. Compare it to the thresholds I gave you. This number alone will tell you something meaningful. Step 2. Do the 3-day symptom audit. Just honest answers to the 5 questions. No equipment, no cost. You already have the data. You've been living IT. Just write it down. Step 3. If you want real data, pick up a $15 glucose monitor and do the Carb challenge tomorrow morning. The protocol I walked you through is exactly what you need. The information you get from it is genuinely extraordinary. And then, whether your numbers look good or concerning, start the 14-day protocol. 10-minute walks after meals. Protein and vegetables before carbohydrates. Consistent sleep. 2 to 3 days per week of strength work. These 4 things together, consistently for 2 weeks, will change your baseline in ways you can measure. And if any of the numbers from the Carb Challenge land in the concerning range, go see your doctor. Ask specifically for fasting insulin and HOMA-IOMIR. Bring your data. Be the informed patient who shows up already knowing what questions to ask. Here's the thing I really want to leave you with. Most chronic disease doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly, for years, while lab values look just acceptable enough to avoid alarm. Insulin resistance is the clearest example of that pattern, a slow erosion of metabolic health happening underneath normal-looking numbers. The fact that you watch this video already puts you in a different category than the 84% of people with prediabetes who have no idea. Information, actually applied, changes trajectories. So, go take the measurements, run the checks, and let me know in the comments. Did any of these results surprise you? What did your numbers look like? Because this stuff only works if you actually do IT. And if you want the next piece, that video is coming. What to eat specifically to accelerate insulin sensitivity recovery. The exact meal structures and foods that have the strongest evidence. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it when it drops.